The first problem facing the UN is the biggest members of the world global community don't pay their dues. They don't pay their taxes to the UN on time.
Permit me, I used ChatGPT for something. It's one of my first times that I did it. I asked ChatGPT a simple question in anticipation of this interview. I said, if we were to reconstitute a seven-member Security Council today using the same entry criteria that brought about the post-World War II membership, who should be a part of it? And its answer was the US, China, EU and Germany, India, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, and Turkey, Saudi Arabia. And that answer is really so far away from what the actual membership looks like today that one has to ask itself, assuming you accept that answer, whether the structure of the UN today is relevant at all. And so I'm going to ask you just directly, because I have this opportunity and you've been incredibly generous with your time, sir. As Canada's permanent representative to the UN, how do you assess the underlying health of the UN as a system of global governance and dialogue, which is the essence of what will, if anything gets us out of the morass, that will. How do you assess the health of the UN, and is the UN facing a lack of credibility that may doom it to irrelevancy? Is there a way of fixing this system? I'd love to hear your thoughts, having spent time in that organization. I would value them.
Well, I mean, the UN is a human institution, which means it's hugely imperfect. It was created in 1945 by 5 victorious countries that decided they needed to have a veto over the future activities of the organization. And we started out with 11 members of the Security Council, not 7. And we then ended up with 15. So the Security Council is too small. It's too small an executive. And the veto is really not helping us. It's not functional. But we wouldn't have a United Nations if we didn't have the veto, because the countries that wanted the veto would not have participated in it. And again, if you have a slightly longer view of history, we did have an experience of failure between 1919 and 1939 with the 20-year history of the League of Nations. And that's part of our history of success and failure. The UN is the one thing you mentioned about, the problems facing the UN. The first problem facing the UN is the biggest members of the world global community don't pay their dues. They don't pay their taxes to the UN on time. And in some cases, they just go on a tax holiday. They say, we're not paying you because we don't like your decisions about X and Y. And so we're not going to pay you. So the most immediate challenge facing the UN is the challenge of money. It's a financial problem. The other problem with the financing of the UN is it doesn't borrow money. And because it doesn't borrow money, it doesn't have the flexibility of every single member state. And the UN is not a global government. It's an association, if you like, of countries who've decided to give it certain jobs to do and certain powers, but it hasn't given it the money to do them, and it hasn't given them the legal authority to actually enforce its own decisions. So to say the UN is not exactly fit for purpose is an understatement. But that's not a reason to give up, or more precisely, if we had to reinvent an organization because this one collapsed, you would have to do something, because you need a place where countries can meet and talk and engage, and where there can be platforms of discussion and negotiation. And you also need to look beyond the world of conflict and resolution to the world of economic development, to the world of social development, to all of where most of the budget of the UN goes. Most of the budget of the UN goes to health, dealing with disease, malaria, starvation, which is now rearing its head again in many, many parts of the world, dealing with climate change, dealing with the underlying technical issues of globalization like telecommunications. That's where the UN's guts are. That's where its money is. And as a global security organization, no, it is not effective. It is not effective. But as I said, it doesn't mean you just throw out the whole thing and say, well, the UN is a waste of money. It's actually, the UN gets far less money than people know and understand. And its main challenge right now, as I said, is not that it has too much money. It's that it doesn't have the financing, the regular assured financing that you'd want any organization to have to be able to do its job.